In 2015, one of my local sneaker shops held a raffle for a bunch of different prizes. I entered the raffle and actually won one of the prizes, but I was pretty disappointed because instead of winning something like a pair of sneakers, I won a meet and greet with two people I knew absolutely nothing about. Those two people were Playboy Cardi and Ian Connor. Of course today everyone knows who Cardi and Ian are, but at the time I was just a 15-year-old kid with a surface level understanding of rap and fashion, and because I didn't know who they were, I decided to not go to the meet and greet. Even though not going ended up being a major L on my part, it did get me wondering, who are these guys? I went through their Instagrams and was instantly intrigued by Ian. Here was this guy wearing crazy outfits, traveling around the world, hanging out with celebrities, and I still had no idea what he actually did. So for the next few weeks I started binging interviews, articles, basically anything I could find on him, and I have to say from that point forward I was pretty much hooked. Now even though Ian was definitely making moves at the time, looking back now he was still in the early stages of becoming one of the most enigmatic, influential, and often controversial figures in the social media era of fashion. In this video we're going to be looking at his insane journey into the fashion industry, including all of his highs and lows along the way, so without further ado, this is the Ian Connor story. In 1993, Ian was born in New York, but would later move to Atlanta at the age of 9. Ian credits the time he spent growing up in Atlanta for making him who he is, but when he turned 18, he moved back to New York where he began hanging out with the likes of Ken Rebel, Jew Henderson, Justine Skye, Ambitious Aid, and Glenn Brown, who was the founder of a brand called L3NF. While you might not be as familiar with everyone I just listed, they were all Tumblr famous at the time, and with their support, L3NF basically became its own youth fashion movement in New York. Ian became a part of this movement, and between posting his fits and being associated with L3NF, he quickly developed a sizable Tumblr following of his own. Even though the hype behind L3NF wouldn't stick around for very long, this newfound popularity opened up opportunities for Ian to start modeling for smaller streetwear brands, and also gave him somewhat of a reputation in the burgeoning New York fashion scene. While the decline in popularity of L3NF spelled disaster for most of the other members of the group, Ian already had his sights set on a newer, much larger movement that was beginning to take shape in Harlem. The ASAP Mob was founded in 2007 by ASAP Yams, ASAP Cam, ASAP Ills, and ASAP Bari. Despite being founded in 2007, the ASAP Mob exploded in popularity starting in 2011 when ASAP Rocky released hit songs like Peso and Purple Swag. So when Ian got to New York, this rap/fashion scene created by the mob was just getting started. Nowadays, Ian is a well-known ASAP affiliate, but at the time he was still just a Tumblr kid from Atlanta, so how exactly did he get his foot in the door? Well, it wasn't easy. Like I said, Ian had made a bit of a name for himself through Tumblr and his time spent with L3NF, so even though he wasn't friends with any members of the mob, he was friends with people who were, and according to Ian himself, he started following ASAP Bari around everywhere. Even though Bari found it annoying at first, Ian says that he always knew Bari would start to like him if they spent enough time together, and that's exactly what happened. The two eventually bonded over their love for fashion, and so Ian started hanging out with the ASAP Mob. This includes ASAP Nast, who Ian says helped introduce him to higher-end designers like Raf Simons. I really can't overstate how pivotal this was for Ian, because Raf Simons would go on to be a major influence for him, and he even got tattoos to match the consumed shirt from Raf Simons' Spring/Summer 2003 collection. So Ian was now fully ingratiated into the ASAP Mob, but they weren't the only ones he was hanging out with. Around this time, Ian also started hanging out with the likes of Lucas Sabat, Kerwin Frost, Austin Babbitt, and Mike the Ruler, who would all become big names in New York's youth fashion scene in just a few years' time. This sort of became Ian's new crew, and keep in mind this was around the same time that Instagram was first coming out, so they were basically just hanging around in Soho, taking fit pics, and growing their Instagram followings together. Now, one thing I have to say about this crew is that they were always great about supporting one another, and Ian was a big part of that. For instance, Ian met Austin Babbitt, who you may know as Asspizza, when he had just 30 followers. Ian, who already had several thousand followers at this point, gave Austin a shout out and his following skyrocketed. He even took to Twitter to tell the world that Austin would someday be the biggest model around. And this just goes to show that if Ian sees something special in you, he's gonna do everything he can to give you a platform. Keep all of this in mind because, as we'll discuss in just a bit, Ian and Austin would eventually have a major falling out. But for now, just know that Ian was finally well connected in the New York fashion scene and had a sizable online following. During Ian's meteoric rise in popularity, many people started referring to him as the King of the Youth. While this might just sound like a punchy nickname, Ian really adopted this persona, and to his credit, he really was becoming one of the most influential figures in youth streetwear culture. He created hype behind basically any brand that had his name and face attached to it, and I mean that literally. In 2013, Ian collabed with New York-based designer Will Fry to release a capsule collection featuring an all-over print of his face. Even though this collection may seem a little over the top, it was extremely popular when it first came out, and it definitely caught a lot of people's attention, both for the good and for the bad. 2013 was also the year that Ian famously modeled for Virgil Abloh's first and only Pyrex campaign. In the campaign, Ian is modeling alongside ASAP Bari, ASAP Ills, ASAP Josh, Nale Jr., and ASAP Nast. According to Ian, at the time, he didn't really know who Virgil was, but recalls that Bari looked up to him so much that he went along with it, and this would then become the start of a long-time friendship between Ian and Virgil. All things considered, Ian really was turning into a star, and one of the first people to recognize this was ASAP Rocky. When Ian first started hanging out with the mob, Rocky wasn't necessarily quick to welcome him into the fold. And in a later interview with Ian and Kerwin Frost, he even talks about how he used to laugh at some of Ian's fits on Tumblr. But over time, Ian proved himself, and in 2014, Rocky officially signed on to become Ian's manager. They signed a 4-year deal together, and this opened a lot of doors for Ian, because it's no secret that Rocky is one of the most fashion-forward rappers out there, so he had no trouble finding opportunities for Ian. And one of the first opportunities that presented itself to Ian was becoming Wiz Khalifa's stylist. Now, Wiz Khalifa isn't really known for his style, but that's exactly why he needed Ian. And Ian really stepped up his game by introducing him to all of the upcoming designer and streetwear brands, including Asspizza. Even though Ian would only work for Wiz for about a year, Wiz brought him on tour during this time, which gave him a chance to travel the world and meet new people in the rap scene. And because he was traveling so much, this was also the birth of his popular airport bathroom selfie trend, which I'm sure you're familiar with if you follow him on Instagram. Speaking of which, it was actually at an airport that Ian Connor met Lil Yachty, who ironically also calls himself the King of the Youth. As the story goes, Ian and Yachty were both walking through an airport, and Yachty happened to be wearing a piece of Rare Supreme. Keep in mind that this was before Yachty had even dropped an album, and on a whim, Ian approached him and complimented the piece. After bonding over their shared love for streetwear, the two Atlanta natives became friends, and little did they know it at the time, but Ian was about to play a major part in jumpstarting Yachty's career. In 2015, A$AP Rocky was working with Kanye West in preparation for his second studio album, At Long Last A$AP, which you may recall Kanye appeared on. This meant that Kanye was now spending time in and around the studio with Rocky, and by association the rest of the A$AP mob, and that included Ian Connor. Fresh off his styling job for Wiz Khalifa, Ian was looking for his next opportunity, and that chance came when Kanye offered him a role as a creative consultant to help with his label Yeezy, which he was just launching at the time. Beyond working as a creative consultant, Ian also began modeling for Yeezy, and made his first appearance in Kanye's debut show for his fall 2015 ready-to-wear collection. This was not only the start of a great working relationship between Kanye and Ian, but it was also the start of a great friendship. Kanye really started to trust Ian's creative vision, and that brings us back to Lil Yachty. One day, while they were in the car together, Ian played Yachty's music for Kanye, and Kanye was instantly intrigued and wanted to know who it was. Now, it's not like Kanye instantly reached out and tried to sign Yachty or anything like that, but it did put him on his radar. Fast forward a few months, and Kanye is preparing to debut his fall 2016 ready-to-wear collection. Yachty and Ian were hanging out together in New York when Ian got the call that Kanye was doing a model casting for the show at Madison Square Garden. As creative consultant, Ian got Yachty in as a model for the show, and the rest is history. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this show because it doubled as the release party for Kanye's 2016 album The Life of Pablo. And even though Yachty wasn't the star of the show, it got a lot of people asking, who is this kid with red hair sitting next to Ian Connor at Kanye's fashion show? And Yachty himself credits this appearance for helping launch him into mainstream popularity. So this is just another example of Ian seeing potential in someone and doing everything in his power to give them a platform. Now, as great as it is that Ian helped jumpstart Yachty's career, let's not brush over the fact that Ian was now friends with Kanye West. As I mentioned, Kanye really trusted Ian's creative vision, and for proof of that, look no further than the announcement made in early 2016 that Ian would be taking over Pastel. Now, if you don't know what Pastel is, it was a clothing line that Kanye was putting together during the 808s and Heartbreak era. Even though the clothing line never actually came out, Kanye put a lot of time and effort into this, and some of the people involved in helping him included Kim Jones, Virgil Abloh, Cause, and Ben Baller, just to name a few. Apparently, he even went as far as selecting manufacturers and distributors, as well as preparing to open his own stores. While this was undoubtedly a valuable experience that helped him prepare for running Yeezy, Pastel never actually released, and all we were left with was images of the now iconic varsity jacket he wore at the 2008 American Music Awards. So fast forward to 2016, and Ian takes to Twitter to share a 10-second snippet of design layouts for Pastel varsity jackets with the caption, "Kanye's gift to me." And he then posted a picture of himself on Instagram wearing a Pastel branded t-shirt with the caption, "Pastel Spring Summer 1." So this was basically all the confirmation we needed to understand that Kanye had given Pastel to Ian. And this promised to be a major turning point for Ian because he was basically now creative director of a brand that A, already had hype behind it, and B, was associated with and supported by one of the biggest artists in the world. Now all of that being said, nothing ever came of it. This announcement was basically the last we heard of anything about Pastel, and to be honest, I don't exactly know why. It's not like there were any problems between Kanye and Ian, because they continued to be friends after this, so I'm guessing there must have been some logistical roadblocks that prevented it from happening. I did read one source saying that the reason Kanye abandoned Pastel in the first place was because he wanted to be associated with higher end fashion and not streetwear. So maybe he was worried about being so associated with Pastel that if it blew up, it would overshadow the work he was doing at Yeezy. But that doesn't really seem to be the case, because then why would he give it to Ian in the first place? Regardless, all we can do is speculate, and even though I was really looking forward to seeing what Ian would do with Pastel, we all know that when one door closes, another door opens. Even though Pastel didn't pan out for Ian, he had a number of other things going for him at the time. For instance, a few months prior to the announcement about Pastel, he took to Twitter to announce that he was now styling Kylie Jenner. I have to imagine that Ian was introduced to Kylie through Kanye, and over time they too developed a friendship. And you can really see the influence that Ian had on her style over the course of 2015 and 2016. Now you might have noticed that in the same tweet announcing his new role styling Kylie, Ian also mentions that he got Cardi signed this same week. Keep in mind this was well before Cardi's debut mixtape, so you might be wondering how these two became friends, and it's actually quite similar to how Ian and Yachty became friends. According to Ian, he saw a picture of Cardi wearing Rare Supreme online, and reached out to try to buy it, which led to them forming a friendship. Now the funny part of this story is that they stayed in contact because of their shared love for fashion, but Cardi, who was trying to get his music career off the ground, kept sending Ian his music. The problem was, Ian wasn't interested and admits that he never actually clicked on any of the links Cardi sent him. That was until one day, Ian's assistant started playing Cardi's music, and Ian asked who it was, only to find out it was his good friend Cardi. From this point forward, Ian made it a priority to promote Cardi, and started posting snippets of his music online, and this generated a lot of early interest in him. This was great for Cardi, but it was also great for Ian, because he was now seen as somewhat of a tastemaker in the underground rap scene. As I'm sure many of you know, Ian and Cardi went on to become extremely close friends, dare I say best friends. And we've talked about several examples now of how Ian has helped to jumpstart others' careers, and Cardi had no problem letting the world know that was the case.
Only nigga that can kill me right now is Ian Connor. You know I kill me because that's my brother.
In this now famous rant, Cardi obviously has high praise for Ian, going as far as calling him his brother, and he basically implies that Ian is the only person with the power to make or break his career. And I'm guessing a large part of this sentiment comes from the fact that Ian is actually the one who introduced Playboy Cardi to A$AP Rocky and the rest of the A$AP mob. It was right after this point that Cardi moved from Atlanta to New York, started working with the A$AP mob, and became one of the faces of A$AP Bari's brand V-Lone. So between Kanye, Kylie, Cardi, and everyone in A$AP, it's fair to say Ian had friends in very high places. You might also remember Ian sharing the runway with Virgil Abloh following the debut of his first ever menswear runway show for Off-White in early 2016. And according to his interview with No Jumper, Ian was actually roommates with the late great Fredo Santana around this time. So it goes without saying that Ian was now fully immersed in this world of celebrities and had become a bona fide celebrity himself. But as we would soon find out, this newfound attention would have its drawbacks. Even though everything appeared to be going great for Ian, there were a few major problems forming just below the surface. The first of which I alluded to earlier. As we discussed, Ian played a major part in giving Austin Babbitt, aka Asspizza, a platform in the streetwear community. Austin then leveraged this platform to build his following and launch his eponymous clothing line. Even though Ian was undoubtedly happy to see Austin getting the attention he deserved, their beef began back in 2014 when Ian went on a Twitter tirade against Austin following an interview that he did with Fader. Austin didn't say anything negative about Ian in the interview, and in fact, he doesn't say anything about Ian at all, and apparently that was the problem. While I'm sure there's a lot we don't know about the situation, the basic premise seems to be that Ian felt like Austin had blown up and forgotten about him. Now, a lot of people will tell you that this interview was what triggered Ian's response, but knowing that they used to be close friends, I find it hard to believe that this falling out was the result of one isolated incident. And I feel like this may have just been their breaking point. Regardless, this was the beginning of a long feud between Ian and Austin. Fast forward to 2015, and Ian shared that he was willing to forgive Austin if he issued an apology, which led to this awkward video.
Sorry, Ian. I'll leave y'all alone. Love y'all. Thanks, Ian. You helped me in the beginning. I'll leave y'all alone.
Austin sent this apology to Ian privately with the understanding it would never be posted, but within the same week he sent it, it was posted on Twitter by Ian Connor affiliate John Ross. Shortly after this, Austin posted another video where he explained the entire situation and concluded by challenging Ian to a boxing match to settle their dispute. And while this never materialized, we did get the now infamous fight between Cardi and Kerwin, where Cardi fought on Ian's behalf and Kerwin fought on Austin's behalf. I don't know why Ian and Austin didn't just fight each other because they were both in the room when this happened, but hey, whatever works. And I guess it did work because after this, things seemed to settle down for a bit. While they never said anything publicly after the fight, 4 years later, in 2019, Ian discussed the situation on Instagram Live and actually spoke very highly of Austin, saying that he's proud of his success, and even though they don't talk much anymore, he's paying attention to his progress online. Now, even though this Asspizza saga is undoubtedly relevant to the telling of Ian Connor's story, it pales in comparison to the much more serious controversy that was just beginning to unfold. According to an article by thefashionlaw.com, which I will link in the description, documents processed on December 16th of 2015 revealed that a 23-year-old woman had filed a report with Georgia police accusing Ian of sexual battery and sexual assault. The report was accompanied by a blog post detailing her accusation, and following the post, a number of other women came forward with similar stories. Following the accusations, Kanye is believed to have flown Ian out to be with him, presumably to offer his support and guidance during the situation. And it just so happens that one of the people leading the charge to cancel Ian was Kanye's ex-girlfriend Amber Rose. According to the same Fashion Law article I just mentioned, Amber Rose spoke with as many as 21 women who came forward with allegations against Ian. But when she tried to give them a platform to speak about it, everything quote-unquote fell through. And out of these 21 accusations, 0 of them went to court and 0 charges were brought against Ian. All of that being said, this is obviously a sensitive topic, so I encourage you to look into it for yourself and draw your own conclusions if you care to do so. What I will say, however, is that the general public's consensus seems to be against Ian Connor. However, in 2017, A$AP Rocky took to the Rap Radar podcast to publicly affirm his belief that Ian is innocent, and even suggests that the women who accused Ian planned this on Twitter weeks in advance of going public. Other members of Ian's circle weren't so easily persuaded, however, which led to the now infamous video of Ian fighting Theophilus London at a Vlone pop-up in Paris. You can see in the video Bari, Virgil, and A$AP Rocky hanging out and signing merch, when all of a sudden Ian and Theophilus start throwing punches, and by the time they get outside, even Bari is throwing punches at Ian. This fight just added another layer of confusion to the controversy, because a few months prior to this, Theophilus had publicly defended Ian's innocence on Twitter, but apparently he changed his stance, which led to the argument seen in the video. So it goes without saying, this whole mess had a lot of people wondering if this was going to be the end of Ian Connor. But as we now know, it definitely was not, and it just so happens he was actually on the verge of another major breakthrough. In In 2017, Ian released the Revenge Storms. Over time, revenge has basically become one of Ian's mantras, as you may be able to tell from his Instagram username, Ian Connor's Revenge. So that's where the first half of the Revenge Storm name comes from, and the second half actually comes from Noah Stutz, who runs a brand called Storm. Even though his name often gets lost in the mix, and most people just associate the shoe with Ian Connor, Noah was the driving force behind the start of Revenge Storm, and handled a lot of things behind the scenes. So in terms of the shoe itself, let's get the elephant out of the room. These are basically Vans with lightning bolts. But to Ian's credit, he never really denied that. In an interview with Hypebeast, Ian said, "I threw a lightning bolt on the old school silhouette," and then went on to say, "I wanted to do what Nigo did with Bape," basically as far as footwear. Here he's referring to Nigo taking the Nike Air Force Ones and creating the Bapestas, and Ian emulated that by taking old school Vans and creating the Revenge Storms. Ian initially received a lot of pushback for these, with a lot of people claiming that they were unoriginal, but at the same time, a lot of other people were really excited, and when they released to the public for the first time in the summer of 2017, they sold out almost immediately. Over the next few months, Ian's Revenge Storms would develop a cult following of their own, and this following included some pretty big names. Fans of Revenge Storms included Kylie Jenner, Virgil Abloh, Nick Young, Tyga, and Lil Yachty, just to name a few. Once people started seeing the shoe on all of these celebrities, they exploded in popularity, and for a while it seemed like the Revenge Storms were the hottest thing in streetwear. The shoe retailed at about $200, but at its peak they were reselling for more than double that. The demand for this shoe was extremely high, but it was all about to come crashing down. According to a post made on the Revenge Storm subreddit, which I'll link below, a few shady things started to go on that contributed to the shoe's downfall. Right around when they were at the height of their popularity, the Chinese online shopping site Taobao somehow acquired a contract allowing them to produce and sell mass quantities of the shoe. In the streetwear world, we refer to this as selling out, and unsurprisingly, the hype went away almost immediately. Keep in mind that these weren't technically knockoffs being made by Taobao, because they were being produced in the same factories as the actual Revenge Storms. But this meant that the supply was no longer limited, and that a bunch of random stores were now selling the shoe. That's why nowadays you can go online and find real Revenge Storms selling at or even well below the original retail price. So what exactly happened? Well, it's not 100% clear, but according to the post, all we know for certain is that Noah, the co-founder of the brand, was not in support of letting this happen, and that it was likely decided by someone else on the Revenge Storm team, which of course includes Ian. Now, I'm not saying that Ian is the one to blame here, because it very well could have been bad brand managers or other stakeholders, but like I said, all we do know is that it wasn't Noah, and that Ian has basically disassociated from Revenge Storm ever since this happened. All of that said, I'm not sure what the future of Revenge Storm looks like at this point, other than the fact that it probably won't involve Ian. But like we said before, when one door closes, another door opens, and that's exactly what was about to happen. In 2018, fresh off of working on Revenge Storm, Ian debuted his new brand, Sicko. In my opinion, things didn't get off to a great start because the brand's logo is basically an exact copy of the logo by Icelandic singer Björk, and people were quick to notice this. At this point, he was already being criticized for the whole Revenge Storm's Vans thing. So the question sort of became, does this guy have any original ideas? And don't get me wrong, I have no problem at all with making design references, but I mean seriously, these two shirts are the exact same. So after this first collection, I was a little skeptical to say the least, but then Ian started working with T-Rex Global. Just to clarify, T-Rex Global is an artist that has an incredibly unique art style, and Ian started incorporating his work into some of Sicko's designs. Yes, I know Ian wasn't doing the art himself, and we should pay T-Rex his dues, but like many creative directors, Ian's job is to curate the brand's aesthetic, and in this case, I have to say he's done an impressive job. Now obviously, Ian's name being attached to the brand has contributed to its popularity, and so has support from his longtime friends like Lil Yachty and Virgil Abloh, but you might be surprised to learn that Sicko's biggest supporter is arguably none other than Drake. It goes without saying that Drake is one of the biggest artists in the world, so you might be wondering how he crossed paths with Ian Connor. While it's not exactly clear how they met, though it was undoubtedly through some mutual celebrity connections, they were first seen publicly together in 2018 with Drake wearing a Sicko hoodie. The two would remain friends, and in 2020, Drake even released an entire song that is basically basically a shout out to Ian. The song, titled Pain 1993, is a reference to the brand's slogan, Born from Pain 1993, which is the year Ian was born. I should also mention that the song features Playboy Cardi, who, as we discussed, is one of Ian's best friends. And in the song, Drake says, "Me and Lil Sicko sitting sideways breaking tens," which is a direct reference to this picture of them together in 2018. Now, the reason I'm mentioning all of this doesn't really have that much to do with the brand. In fact, I wouldn't even say Drake helped the brand that much, because it's not like it exploded in popularity after the pictures or the song came out. But it's more about the fact that a public figure as famous as Drake publicly co-signed Ian despite all of his allegations. Drake is someone who takes his public image very seriously, and for him to stick his neck out for Ian says a lot about their friendship. So back to Sicko itself, like I said, I really like the direction that the brand is moving in with the help from T-Rex Global. And to be honest, it's been nice to see Ian really step into this type of creative director role. He's not just treating it like another t-shirt brand. He's making real collections, developing a real brand identity, putting together real campaigns, basically everything you want to see out of a new label. Unlike Revenge Storm, he seems fully invested in this new venture, and I'm really interested in seeing what comes of it. Now, even though things are looking up for Ian, Connor, and Sicko, this story wouldn't be complete without mentioning some of his more recent legal trouble. In June of 2019, Ian took to his private Instagram to share that he would be spending 1 year in jail over 2 illegal gun charges. And he also shared that his fiancée, Raven Tracy, would be taking over his business while he was away. Despite the 1-year sentence, he actually ended up getting out in December of 2019. Obviously, the time he spent in jail hindered his progress with Sicko, and now that he was out, he could recommit to the brand. However, that didn't last very long, because as of the time this video is being made, Ian is currently back in jail. Just to clarify, from what I've read, he's carrying out a sentence from another previous gun charge, and not from anything he's done since getting out the first time. On January 24th, this photo of Ian in jail was posted to his Instagram. For some reason, he's holding an off-white Nike Air Force One. I'm not sure why or how he got it in there, but at least we know he's staying on top of his style while he's in jail. Now, I'm not exactly sure how long he's in there for this time, but I have to expect that Sicko is going to be on hold for as long as he's away. While I'm sure he has no intention of going back once he gets out, you have to start to wonder just how much this legal trouble is going to set him back in the future. Like we discussed earlier, none of his previous allegations went to trial, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that some of them might. And now he's got a handful of gun charges on his record, so to put it bluntly, he's walking on thin ice here. And it's not like we can sit here and pretend we didn't see this coming. Literally less than 60 seconds into his 2015 No Jumper interview, Ian asks the host Adam22 if he would like to see his unlicensed gun, and then proceeds to show him his unlicensed gun on camera. So maybe moving forward, Ian's gonna need to be a little bit more discreet, and hopefully he can stay out of trouble so that he can keep moving forward with Sicko. So that is basically everything I wanted to touch on for the Ian Connor story, and now the question becomes, what's next? Today, Ian is undoubtedly one of the most controversial figures in streetwear, and his story is undoubtedly one of the most intriguing. He started off as a Tumblr kid posting fits, got wrapped up into the world of rap, and rode to the top with the ASAP mob, then transitioned his way into the ranks of Virgil, Abloh, and Kanye. Along the way, he's made many friends, he's made many enemies, and he's made many friends into enemies. The allegations against him forever changed his public image, and many of the people that once supported him now hate him. Despite the success he's found with recent ventures like Revenge Storm and Sicko, it's hard to imagine a future where we discuss Ian Connor and his accusations aren't brought up. That being said, however, I do see a future where we will be discussing Ian Connor. He started Sicko in 2018 and has been in and out of jail since 2019. But once he completes his current sentence, assuming he can stay out of trouble, I think there's a real chance that we see the resurgence of Ian Connor. Maybe we could even call it a revenge tour. Anyways, thank you all for watching Threaducation. If you want to see more videos like this, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you next time.
Oh, sprinkler.
Show the fresh cut to the people. Show them that fresh cut. Hey. Hey. Hey.